So please now, I want you to welcome Andrea Bonime-Blanc. And you've already heard a couple of references from gloom to bloom. Boom, boom. I like bloom. And this is going to be a little bit different format. We're going to have kind of a fireside chat here with Val. And we met earlier this year in Davos. We had a couple of bus rides together and learned a lot of very interesting things about her. So she was applying to law school. What was it, Columbia? At Columbia. And she found a mentor in Zbigniew Brzezinski. Zbigniew Brzezinski. And you know, again, what we're encouraging every one of you to do, he took this young woman under his wing and mentored her, opened doors for her, made introductions for her, and really, I think, helped set your career path to where you are today. So please welcome Angela, and Val is going to do the interview with her.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
The stage since Davos about talking about leadership, governance, ethics, and overall taking responsibility. And you know, Andrea has been a phenomenal partner in this discussion, and I just couldn't wait to get here and put this on the main stage. So Andrea, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much.
And I think great timing for your book coming out. This is what number book? Remind me again. It's just probably we had the AI book.
Yeah, I have around 5 books. One co-authored, the other 4 solely authored, and then I've edited a few books.
Okay, excellent. So keep it coming.
I'm sure I'll do anything
Andrea, I
after this
think
one.
Harold mentioned about her beginnings, and I think you should probably know Andrea really well now, considering that she is a voice for, I would say, leadership and vision. Okay, and in our businesses, we have this constant churn about how do you respond, how do you recover, how do you react, right? I think the reason and responsibility, these two come together in what the work that she does, not just in terms of, I would say, governance, risk, and compliance, but also the overall governance of businesses. And I think that's essential for this community to understand, right? Beyond cyber and how does it impact. So let's start with the book and what you're trying to, you know, what I think it's a journey and your learning is coming out as these books, and I really am curious. Now you have the first copy, of course. So, I mean, why did you write Gloom to Boom?
When did I write it?
Or why was Gloom to Boom?
So the book is called Gloom to Boom because even though I think we are living in very challenging and potentially gloomy times, if you look at a variety of different things going on around the world, I think it is incumbent on leaders, and I focus mostly on leaders, meaning the leaders of companies, of governments, of nonprofits, to really focus on creating positive value, not only, you know, for their primary stakeholders, like business would be shareholders and nonprofits would be beneficiaries, governments would be citizens. They have to also look at the broader context of stakeholders. And recently, many of you, I'm sure, have seen some of the statements coming from the Business Roundtable and a couple of other organizations where they're suddenly, finally, in my opinion, coming to the realization that you have to take into account not only your primary shareholder in the case of business, but the employees and the customers and the other stakeholders who have an expectation in your business and in your results. Because, for example, I think cyber is a perfect example of this. When cyber attacks occur and you're not prepared, it's not just your shares that drop, it's your reputation that drops, your other stakeholders, whether they're customers, if their private information has been stolen. So you have to sort of think about the ecosystem of stakeholders when you're doing business or when you're governing a piece of government agency or government nationally or locally, and also the same for the nonprofits.
Okay. No, that's excellent. And I think in this industry, when you're moving from crisis to crisis, I think it's essential to pull yourself together and to understand why you're doing this, right? So there is another role that you have beyond being author of multiple books is you're a faculty at NACD, National Association of Corporate Directors. How many of you know NACD? Quite a few, I guess. And I think that's a key component in this ecosystem. And Andrea is kind of as representative of CFF, I would say, if I will, to the NACD community. We'll have Larry tomorrow also. But I think, what's your perspective on how do you take this message to the boards, and how do you realize the outcome of leadership and governance?
Yeah, so I mean, I think many of you are very familiar with the sort of disconnect that occurs at the board level very often when it comes to new kinds of risks. And I dabble in not only the cyberspace, but also in what people are calling ESG, environmental, social, and governance topics, basically, which is part of what the Business Roundtable and BlackRock through Larry Fink and others have been starting to talk about more proactively. Investors are looking at it. So I like to think of the ecosystem of non-financial issues includes ESG, and it includes cyber as a technology issue among many technology issues. So in my book, I sort of coined this term of ESG plus T. This is a portfolio of issues that boards really need to pay attention to, and they are uniquely unqualified to do so because they are usually CFOs and CEOs, many of them retired already, maybe not as closely in touch with the operations of their businesses and their companies and their industries. And so they're very good at financial planning and looking at revenues and performance, financial performance, but they're not that good at looking at what I call ESG and T, and I totally include cyber in that package. And so their disconnect with these issues in general, and then on top of that, with technology issues and understanding cyber, makes it very hard for the sort of the traditional boards to really do a good job until they get hit with a major scandal, as we've seen many companies hit in the last 5 to 7 years, I would say. And then they suddenly wake up and they bring in the consultants and the lawyers and everybody else. But my perspective is that boards really need to sort of diversify their own ranks. They need to bring in people with other areas of expertise. Maybe it's risk, maybe it's corporate responsibility, maybe it's some other things that are relevant to their particular business. If it's an oil and gas company, environmental health and safety is important. But bring in a more diverse cadre of people on the board who can ask all the right questions. Now, there's this big debate going on about whether you should have a cyber expert on the board. And I have mixed feelings about that because you don't want to have a very narrowly focused cyber expert. You want to have someone who has had a sort of a diversity of experiences and situations that they've had to deal with. So maybe that's a risk person or a governance person who has seen a variety of different things, but knows how to ask the right questions. Now, if the company is about pure technology, then of course you want to have technology directors on that board. So I think it depends on the business, on the footprint, et cetera. But I think boards are really still very, very behind on understanding this issue in a proactive, sort of preventative way. And I think the more we can create diversity on the boards to bring in people who can ask those questions and prepare the company, going back to the crisis management preparation that the previous panel talked about, having good enterprise risk management, having good crisis management, doing the scenario planning, that has to happen at the board level in terms of being connected to the business, of the everyday business.
So Andrea, let me ask kind of a follow-up question to this is, board and the executives have now aware of cyber issues, and I don't think awareness is the issue, it's about the action is the issue, right? How do you bridge the gap between this, executive awareness to executive action? Do you think they are the ones who need action, or they are going to push the management to action?
That's a great question, and I think it's a combination of the two. I wrote a piece for the conference board a few years ago called a strategic cyber risk roadmap for the board, from sit back to lean in. And so just from a visual standpoint, there's too much sit back going on. You know, there's always a struggle between management and the board. Management doesn't want the board, messing with their everyday activities, which I totally understand. I used to be part of management. But at the same time, I think there has to be a greater sort of kicking up a couple of notches of the responsibility of the board to pay attention, understand, and oversee the accountability on these topics. And so the CEO of a company needs to be more proactively watched by the board for performance management that goes beyond the financial performance management. So I think a very good way to connect the dots back to, not meddling with management, but getting involved with making sure management is doing the right things is to make sure that the performance management compensation system is not just tied to revenues and profits, but it's also tied to metrics on cyber maybe, or metrics on risk management, and making sure that the CEO is held accountable for those things, as well as the overall management, that it trickles into the organization.
I think that's a great visual alignment of sit back versus lean in, right? So I think dig a little bit deeper into this. You know, in my day job, I get to sit on board meetings, and I typically get called in to present to audit committees, right? And I think it's a very kind of view of independently looking at the activities, and that's what board's responsibility is anyway. Where do you see in a overall governance framework from the boards connecting to the management and working together as a team? I'll probably repeat this what Sean told this morning. It's a team sport, right? It's a team sport. Cybersecurity is a team sport. So some of the boards I have looked at, they are mostly the audit committee is mostly focused on this. It barely goes to the finance committee unless there is a big impact, financial impact. I mean, post data breach every time. What's the damage and how do we go to how are we covered and all that. I wish that could be proactive a little bit. Where all you see, who's the lead champion? In my view, I would say audit committee's been the lead champion. Maybe I work for audit firm, that's why it is. But what are you seeing in the diversity of those boards?
Yeah, so that's another great observation. And I think I've been an advocate for a very long time now. I actually wrote another piece about 10 years ago about ethics on the board, which was about trying to get the board to think about proactive management of ethics and integrity and compliance within their companies. And so I really think that boards need to be, the way boards manage or oversee management has to be fundamentally changed in several ways. And I think putting everything in the audit committee is a big mistake because they're already overwhelmed with financial issues. They've got the biggest portfolio of issues to begin with. And then you're throwing in risk management, you're throwing in cyber and the kitchen sink. And these people don't have the time or the ability to really be proactive overseers of everything. So I've been advocating, depending on the company and its footprint and its sector and everything else, its size, that there maybe should be an additional committee that's customized to that business, but that's maybe a risk or risk and corporate responsibility or ESG. I mean, there's different ways of using nomenclature. But I think the important thing is that it has that portfolio of what I like to call non-financial risks and issues, which have a major financial reputational impact, but that those issues are more proactively overseen and that maybe you actually have one or two board members who are versed in those areas and can actually ask the questions. So I think we need to morph in that direction. I don't think there's enough movement yet, but there's some of the companies that are a little more visionary and forward are doing things of that nature.
Absolutely, and I think in terms of seeing what's happening now as to where we want to go directionally, I think it's important to understand what the board understands properly, and I think business risk is something, financial risk. This is no-brainer for boards. I mean, they understand that, right? How can we present that? And then that's a segue to my next question about typically, and in this room, I would say there is an exceptional team of chief information security officers, chief security officers who have done tremendous contribution to this industry. But there are a lot of new CISOs and chief information security officers and chief security officer, even chief risk officers, who are trying to get a handle on the translation of the cyber, the technicalities that they deal with on a day in and day out, to go and present to the board. Where do you think we bridge that gap? I mean, that translation is very hard, as you can understand, right? So, from a board perspective, what do you use recommendation for a security, mostly technically oriented person to go present?
My single best recommendation is based on my own experience being inside 4 different companies over almost 20 years, where I was played different roles, general counsel and then ethics and risk and chief audit, and a few others, also information security. And the thing that I learned there is that all of those functions need to be interconnected with each other. They need to work together. They need to compare notes, data, information, metrics, et cetera. So again, every company is a little different and has a different footprint and set of issues. But if you can get the people who are sort of the issues managers, if you have like people in public relations or communications, to talk to the people in risk management, if you have enterprise risk management, to then talk to the owners of the risks, which will include the chief information security officers for their sort of portfolio of issues. If you could have an interdisciplinary team that talks to each other and tries to solve things together. My last corporate job, I was in charge of audit, risk, and compliance, and they threw in InfoSec for good measure because I didn't have enough to do. And I suffered tremendously learning the InfoSec piece because as a lawyer, I'm a little bit daft anyway, but or recovering lawyer at this point. But no, the point being that we do talk different languages and we have to bridge that gap. And I think the best way to do that is to have sort of that interdisciplinary team of people who can sort of ask each other and brainstorm with each other and whiteboard things and really sort of get to the solution. And so one of the best practices that I've seen in my own experience is having an enterprise risk management team that we used to meet every 6 weeks. We would have the results of the ERM exercise every year. We would have our top 5 risks, which definitely included cyber. And we would have smaller sort of task forces, we called them rapid deployment forces, RDFs. And they would go in and try to solve for that risk and then come back to the committee, which was interdisciplinary. And then we would go to the board. We would go to the audit committee. I would interface with the audit committee. So I think there are creative ways to do this. There has to be, but where there's a will, there's a way. And if you don't have the right kind of leadership from the CEO and then from the board holding the CEO accountable, then you're not going to get that momentum and those resources and the ability to have those meetings. So a lot of things need to be in place for that to happen. But even if you're in a difficult political environment within your organization, you can always talk to other people that are your peers to try to, solve problems, even if your leadership isn't very attuned or interested until they get cyber attacked.
Well, I better get ready for that. I think one of the other things that we have been talking about is the responsibility part, right? So we talk about the operations part and the leadership part and also the framework. I think, where do you think, looking from top down again, governance and board level, where do you think the responsibility of cyber as a risk component lies? Do you, and there is a big debate in the industry as to where the CISO should report to. And we have tried in the industry to report back to general counsels such as you and chief risk officers, CIO. I think that has moved a lot out, and there is a consensus, if not at all close to have CISOs report out of CIOs, not into CIOs, and have them connected dots, so that the ones who are building it are not also kind of protecting it, right? So any thoughts from the top down as to where the cyber security, not just technology-wise, but cyber risk lies?
It's a complex question. I like to say that it requires thought on the part of each organization. It's not a one-size-fits-all. It's not a cookie-cutter kind of a thing. So every company is going to have a slightly different cyber profile. If you're a utility, you have a very different cyber profile from a garment manufacturing company, for example, although both of them can, One can be very well organized and resilient and not have problems like a utility, and a garment manufacturer that doesn't have any systems and controls in place might get attacked. And so, but I think from a spectrum of different kinds of industries, you need to really customize your how your information security is organized and where it reports. Another piece that I wrote a few years ago, I was struggling with this issue, not just for cyber, but for a bunch of other issues, which, again, that goes back to sort of my thought that there are all these issues that are non-financial ESG and T issues that that need a home at the executive level and then reporting up to the board. And I suggested this maybe 10 years ago in a piece that I wrote, and I haven't really seen it happen anywhere, so I might be very wrong that it'll ever happen. But if you have a seasoned executive who's been a CISO or been a risk officer or a compliance and regulatory person or even investor relations, someone who's sort of had a broader portfolio, then you could have all of these kinds of issues coming into this one executive who would sit on the C-suite maybe or the executive team and represent those issues at the management level, and then also report into the board, maybe not the audit committee, maybe if there's a risk and compliance or some other kind of non-audit committee, that person could then report into that board level. So I think there has to be more of that going on. Some companies are doing it, but I wouldn't say that there's certainly, it's caught on like wildfire. But I think we need to really start thinking like that because we have too many issues that are floating around. I mean, we're talking about cyber here, but if you take just the issues that are coming up through all the new technological changes that are taking place, AI, ethics, nanobiology, technology, quantum is coming down the pike. I mean, they all may have intersections with cyber as well. And everything is interrelated, basically. But these kinds of issues need someone to, to understand them and represent them within corporations or businesses, and certainly other kinds of organizations too, in order to solve to them, to prevent, serious risks from happening, and so on.
Excellent. So, from there, I think, kind of getting to the top of our conversation, I want to tee up for the next round or next session, and that's around leadership. So what are the asks of core leadership principles that you would recommend or you would want for us to focus on for boards and executives to drill through all these issues? I mean, they are inundated by many issues, and this is one of them, right? What do you think are the core developmental, avenues for leadership for boards?
I think that it's really important to, if you're within a business and you're in charge of information security, for example, to connect with all the other key peers that you have within your organization, whether or not you have a reporting relationship. It's basically transversal relationships where you can help each other and learn from each other. The other thing that I really learned the hard way many times when I was within organizations is that sometimes you're not reporting to the right person, so you don't get the support, you don't get the resources, you don't get the tone from the top that you want. But there may be someone in the universe of leaders in your organization who is a sympathetic, knowledgeable person who will actually listen to you and advocate for the issues that you want to have heard that are important. And so I think it's really critical for mid-level leaders and leaders to sort of do this kind of connecting with peers, developing the issues, the strategy, making sure that your issues get thought of as part of the development of strategy in the business, and that those get represented at the executive level and hopefully then also get taken up to the board level. And so it's a lot of shoe leather, a lot of hard work, blood, sweat, and tears, but if you're passionate about your topic or your area of expertise, to me, that's the way to make this happen. I had a lot of sort of desert times in my corporate life where I was needing support to be able to do the things that I needed to do. And I looked around and I found people, and you help each other and you represent for your shareholders and your stakeholders. And that's the key focus is you're there to serve them. not just to make money and a living. So it's a combination of responsibilities that we need to, and I think we're living in a very, very complicated, gloomy world in many ways.
Say the least.
It's incumbent on us to each step up as much as we can, both personally and professionally. So it's not just about making the money, it's about making the world a slightly better place if we can.
That's a fantastic note to end this conversation. But we got a couple of minutes for questions. We'll take 2 questions.
You got a microphone right here. Right here. Look at that.
High tech, baby. Andrea, thank you very much for your insights. Looking forward to reading your book. I think one of the themes, Val, that I've heard so far this morning is gibberish. So we've had the cyber gibberish, and we've had the lawyer gibberish, then we had the politician gibberish. Andrea's now brought in the board gibberish. Maybe we need to be translators more than anything else, I think, here. So my question, Andrea, to you is, you've got this great experience. I've sat on 3 public boards so far in my career, all one at a time. And each time I struggled with the switch, or the division between governance, which is what a board's supposed to provide, and operations. I was the only person on the board that could spell cyber, and the only person near my generation on the board. And so the questions were all about, yeah, but on my home PC, what do I do with that button? Instead of how do we comply with this or stop this malware? And I very quickly got dragged into operational things. I sort of became a free CISO, which I didn't like, and moved on. So are you finding, is there guidance, or are you finding coaching for people that do want to come on and do want to serve? And I do believe that we need to fix the boards to fix the situation. But in order to bring people on, is there some guidance around not getting sucked into operational and staying on the governance side?
You underscore a number of real serious problems that exist at the board level, and I'm going to be a little bit un-PC here and say that we really need to refresh the boards. Maybe that's not un-PC, but we really need to bring in new blood, and it doesn't have to be super young people, but it has to be people with experience and relevant expertise and a broader set of expertises. I don't think being a CFO and a CEO is enough to be on a board. You need to have the other experiences like you have, like I have, like Val has, and I'm sure many people here in this room. We need to be part of that governance. And then there has to be good governance in and of itself, in the sense of, you need to look at skills matrix, you need to look at background, you need to look at diversity, you need to look at experience. Some of these boards are all, again, I'm gonna be on PC, they're all older white men from America when they have a global company that has a huge footprint in other parts of the world. Why not bring someone in from one of those parts of the world? Why not bring in a woman? Why not bring in a person of color who have the right experience? And I think when you have that diversity, I mean, we've seen a ton of studies coming out over the last 10 years or so from McKinsey, from Catalyst, from Accenture, showing that this diversity actually creates more value for the stakeholders and the shareholders. So, and I'd love to talk about Microsoft as a really great example of a company that has the right kind of leadership, right kind of culture, and they're killing it when it comes to profitability. And they have a diverse board, and their board actually proactively looks at cyber, does scenario planning. I mean, they're doing all the right things. Their CISO and their CRO are up there talking to the CEO on a regular basis. Now, they have a certain kind of business, of course, but they're also being very proactive and preventative, and the board gets it as well. So it can be done, but I think there's a lot of lethargy and a lot of, this is the way we do things.
Thank you.
Great question. So I think we'll take one more question and out of time. So Nancy, and we'll take it outside.
So just as a comment, I'm a member of NACD and a former CEO of a cyber startup. What I see is that NACD is pushing everyone to go and take their cyber training, which they're doing with Carnegie Mellon. That's great. But what I see coming out of that is a checklist mentality, and I think everyone in this room understands a checklist is worthless the moment it's printed, because everybody's moved on. And it still feels that they do not appreciate the true personal risk and liability, as well as the corporate risk and liability, because I still see programs that are, talking about personal identity, and I'm kind of like, well, get LifeLock and take care of that, not really understanding the true serious risks that are out there for a company and for the nations.
I totally agree with you. And by the way, for the record, I'm not an NACD employee. I'm a faculty member, so I do education for them. But so I don't represent them. I don't want to, create any confusion. But your point is very well taken, and this is why checklist approaches to anything don't work. And it's nice to have the, certification or whatever you want to have. But I think at the end of the day, we really need to have those kinds of people who actually know this stuff and live and breathe it every day so they can make that contribution at the boardroom level, not just the checklist.